my name is Susan Parker Burns, and I'm the Consul for Press and Culture at the U.S. Consulate in Krakow. We're very excited. This is our first ever Zoom In on America web video that we have for you in English, and we have a very special guest with us, and that's astronaut George Zamka. He's an astronaut with NASA. He was a test pilot for the U.S. Marines and has logged over 4,000 hours as a pilot. And since 1998, he's worked for NASA, and in 2007, he had his first flight aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery. And so he's here with us today, and interviewing him will be Grzegorz Jasinski from RMF Radio. Over to you.
Good evening.
Evening, Gregor.
The first question, which is important for us, is your Polish origin. Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. My great-grandfather emigrated from Poland, we think the region was Pomerania, to the United States in the year 1885, settled in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He came over with some brothers. I think one perhaps came before him, and they began to bring the brothers over in sequence. They were artisans, they were carpenters by trade, and they started a family store that lasted until about 1970.
When was the first thought that you remember about being an astronaut?
Oh gosh, I think the first thought I remember was the excitement of when Apollo 11 was approaching its landing on the moon. And I remember this somewhat painfully because I was riding with my father in a car, and just before the Apollo lander landed on the moon, we went into a tunnel and we lost the radio reception. So I missed the landing, and we came out the other side and they had already landed. So the memory for me was one of, oh gosh, just missed it, but I had the bug then for sure.
So you decided to be in the good time, in a good place, in the right time to have your own space memories.
I did. I was fortunate in that when I was young I liked working with machines, I liked taking things apart. I also liked airplanes a lot, and I wanted to fly. So flying and my wish to be an astronaut, which I really didn't think was possible at the time, they ended up helping each other out, and one day after joining the Marines and flying airplanes and then being a test pilot, I found myself in a position where I could seriously apply to be an astronaut, and then I ended up being one.
Do you remember any of your pilot experiences which may be a little bit similar to the space excursion?
Well, probably when I was in a fighter airplane, the F-18, we practiced a lot of dogfighting, so there's lots of changes in attitude, and you don't necessarily pay much attention to what is up and what is down. You're usually doing this in reference to another airplane, and that is what you're using as a deciding point as to where you are in the world. And of course in space we can fly in any attitude. We can fly backwards, upside down, which is how we normally fly. And when we join up to the space station turns around and flies backwards, so you get used to having your attitude references changed.
Just a couple of weeks ago you had the first anniversary of your flight. There were some, let's say, celebration about it.
Yes, I sent a note out that, you know, when we come back from a flight we get broken up and we get sent to all different positions. So I had former crew members that were in Russia. I had members that were in Seattle, Japan, or Seattle at the time after having a trip from Japan. I had one that had gone and climbed Mount Everest. So we were really scattered. But on the day of our launch, I sent a quick note telling everybody, hey, it's been a year, happy anniversary. And then we all came back and had responses about little things that we remembered from the flight.
Now there is a mission of shuttle Endeavour, and you probably watched this. And could you tell me about your feelings when you see the mission just after being there and seeing all on your own eyes?
Oh, sure. After having been there and had the experience of for starters, just living in space, getting up in the morning and trying to change clothes and brush your teeth and get cleaned up a little bit, I have a great appreciation for what their day is like. One thing that is different is I think it is much harder to watch your friends launch in a space shuttle than to actually be inside it for the launch, because when you're inside you're concentrating on your duties, but when you're outside you get caught up in the excitement of the countdown, and you start thinking about all kinds of distractions and such. So I think it's easier to fly in it than to watch it.
So let me ask you about your duties. You are a pilot, so there are two pilots, commander and pilot. What are your duties during the flight? It's not only start and landing.
Correct. For the ascent, it's largely a monitoring task. A normal shuttle ascent is completely automated. The problem is the first thing that goes wrong, we are out of that automated mode. There are things that we have to reconfigure in order to prevent a calamity should the next thing happen. So the monitoring task is pretty intense and it's pretty fatiguing because you're looking at a lot of things. For rendezvous and for docking, I am assisting the commander. I'm basically running the checklist, making sure we configure the autopilot correctly, getting communication calls out at the right time. And then for undocking, I get to fly and fly around the space station. That was a beautiful thing. And for landing, again, I'm assisting the commander. Landing's a difficult task, and I'm making sure that our altitudes and airspeeds are correct during the approach. I put the landing gear down, and I put the drag chute down at touchdown.
It's impressive for me every time I see the landing gear going down just a couple of seconds before the landing. It's not typical for other planes, flying devices.
Right. Well, the shuttle's a glider, so we don't have any engines to go around, and we don't have any engines to defeat the drag that comes from putting the landing gear down. So we put the landing gear down at 300 feet, which is about 15 seconds prior to actual touchdown. So we don't get much time to make sure those rails are down.
How could you compare the flying, the last moments of flying the shuttle to the plane? One of the astronauts told me that it's something like flying a brick.
I consider it a freight train. For some reason, before we landed, someone told, "Hey, listen for the noise of the shuttle. You'll start hearing it at about 1,000 feet." And sure enough, as we passed 100,000 feet of altitude, I could start hearing wind. And that wind got louder and louder. So by the time we were landing, I couldn't ignore it. It sounded like a freight train coming down the track to me. And so it was very loud, and watching the rotation, it feels like a freight train, like you're trying to land a locomotive on a runway.
The new regulations concerning the safety of the shuttle demand new type of operations. Those rendezvous and fleet back and watching. Tell us about this procedure, and is it necessary to train for it additionally, or it's the part of the normal pilot of the shuttle business?
We had to learn a lot of things as a result of the accidents that we've had, and one of those things is a way to inspect the heat shield of the shuttle. We do it on the second day. We use instruments that we put on the end of our robotic arm and look. And then as we approach the space station, we do a kind of a backflip where we flip over at a rate of 3/4 of a degree per second to allow the space station astronauts to document the heat shield. They have very good cameras with big lenses. Those get telemetered to the ground, and they look at those, and that's how they clear our heat shield.
Is it a difficult maneuver? I understand that it's not possible to use the rocket engines nearby the station, not to make any kind of damage to this.
That's a good point. It is. We use the autopilot to do it, but it is a procedurally complex maneuver because we have to do exactly what you said. We have to use the autopilot to get the maneuver going. We change modes on it just to make sure that we are in the best rate that we can be, and then we have to turn the flight control power off and go into a free mode where there are no reaction control jets that will fire. So essentially we're just following the rules of Isaac Newton developed 500 years ago as we're flipping underneath the space station until we're at a safe distance and can turn the autopilot back on.
It's nice that those rules are not changing.
Those are great rules. I love them. We count on them a lot.
Do you expect to fly shuttle again, or do you think that your next mission will be with a new type of the space rocket, or?
Well, we've got about 8 shuttle missions left to fly, 8 or so, and I'm hopeful to get one of those before we retire the shuttle. And then after that, it's on to a new adventure, possibly with Soyuz onto space station, and possibly with Orion.